And welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see that website right there. Don't click it. That's not a link. It's just a picture. But you can type into your address bar Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and that'll take you right to the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we have message boards, which are particularly, we could say therapeutic at a time like this, or at least gives you a place to rant with other fans. And I mean, let's be honest, that's more than half the fun of being a sports fan. Not necessarily the ranting part, but just being able to communicate and talk to other fans of your favorite team, to be able to have those conversations. I think I always say, like, sports fans like to watch their favorite team, and then their second favorite thing to do, and sometimes it's like a 1A, 1B situation, there is to talk to other fans of their favorite team. And that's where the fun is, and that's what we give you an opportunity to do on the Panther-Lair.com message boards. I think it's the best online community of Pitt sports fans that you're going to find. They are passionate, they are dedicated, and they are on there all day, every day, talking about Pitt sports. And they definitely have more to talk about when you're in the wake of a loss, as Pitt is right now. Panthers, of course, lost to Georgia Tech on Saturday. A bad loss, a terrible loss. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way to Georgia Tech, but if you are Pitt and you're going to do some of the things you think you should be able to do this year, you can't lose to Georgia Tech. I mean, you've taken some of those things off the table now. Whatever those biggest goals that you had and that they talked about in the spring and they talked about in training camp, I mean, those goals are off the table. You don't have that in your sights anymore. Now, you have a lot of things still in your sights. There are a lot of things you can still accomplish. But that biggest goal, that's not one of them anymore. You don't even need to talk about it. You don't need to talk about what could they do? How could they sneak their way in? They're not sneaking their way in. Not after 2 home losses, including one against a team that's 1-3 and fired its coach. They're 2-3 now. So that's off the table. But some of these other things are still on the table. And I think when you look around the Coastal Division right now, we might think less of Pitt's chances against some of these other teams, but we also, I don't think we're thinking that much more of some of these teams. I mean, you look around the results from this weekend, 6 out of the 7 Coastal teams were in action. Miami was off, still licking their wounds from the Middle Tennessee loss. But the other 4 teams, obviously Pitt and Georgia Tech played on Saturday at Acrisure Stadium, but the other 4 teams were all in action. North Carolina beat Virginia Tech 41-10. Which I think confirmed some things about both teams. Confirmed that Virginia Tech is bad. It should be bad enough to come in here and be a win for Pitt, although would have said the same thing about Georgia Tech. But I think it confirmed that Carolina's offense is really good. We had seen that throughout the season thus far, even when they were bad, even when they were losing games like they did to Notre Dame, or on the brink of losing games as they were a couple times against Group of 5 opponents. They still were able to score. The offense wasn't the problem for North Carolina, and it wasn't the problem against Virginia Tech over the weekend, even though the Hokies came in with one of the better defenses, or seemingly one of the better defenses in the Coastal Division. They give up 41 in North Carolina. It looks like the battle of strengths there went in favor of the Tar Heels, who are now 4-1 overall, 1-0 in the ACC. That was their first conference game. And they're receiving some votes in the Associated Press poll. When you look at the rankings, obviously Pitt dropped out. We talked about that yesterday. But they did receive some votes, and so did North Carolina. Kind of snuck in there in the also receiving votes, as did Duke, who beat Virginia over the weekend. It was a 38-17 game. Duke is now 4-1 overall and 1-0 in the ACC. And the creeping possibility of Duke being okay continues to sort of exist out there. The possibility still exists, and they're already at 4 wins. When you get to 4-1 as Duke, I mean, you're almost playing with house money. I've often related the story of how I was on, this is a Twitter space with David Hale and Andrea Adelson from ESPN before the season. We were talking, it was the Coastal preview episode, and the Duke reporter, I think Stephen Wiseman was his name, basically said if Duke can win 4 games, that's a success for Duke. I mean, that bar has to have raised after, getting out of the first 5 games, already at that 4-win mark. I mean, now you're looking at a bowl bid is the minimum, I think, for this Duke team when they've got 7 games to play and they only need to win 2. And really, if you're Duke, you might only need to win one, because remember, if they run out of 6-win teams to fill the bowl spots, they potentially start looking at 5-win teams, and that could, I think they do give preference to those smart kids, and Duke would get an advantage there. But I don't think they're going to need that. I don't think they need the APR to get them into where they want to be. I think they're going to win 2 out of their final 7 games at least, and potentially even have a chance to be a 7-win team, which is quite an accomplishment at Duke, as they go through a coaching change and sort of start a new era for the Blue Devils. Now, on the flip side of that game, Virginia falling to 2-3 overall. They're now 0-2 in the ACC. They score 17 points in this game, and their woes just continue. Virginia does not look good this year. And no matter, we can debate Pitt's place in the Coastal, but they got to be above Virginia. They got to be. You might say, well, I don't know how far above Georgia Tech they are, since they just lost to Georgia Tech at home, but they at least are still above Virginia. I don't think that much more of any of these teams. Carolina, Virginia Tech, certainly not Virginia Tech, certainly not Virginia. Duke, there's still a wait and see kind of approach with Duke. Carolina seems to have some major vulnerabilities that could catch up with the Tar Heels as they move through the next 7 games here. And Miami has obviously shown itself to be vulnerable. I don't really think all that much more of those other 6 teams, or the 5 that Pitt still has to play. I think we all would probably agree that we just think a little bit less of Pitt's chances. To look at those games and say, oh yeah, Pitt should just roll through that schedule. Well, we could say that before they had like 5 total yards of offense in the first quarter against Georgia Tech the other night. We could say that before Keaton Slovis went 2 of his first 10 for 8 yards. We could say that before Pitt had just such a horrific performance to score 7 points through 3 quarters. When you do that, when you play like that, and it seems to compound some of the issues that you're already concerned about from the first 4 games, well, now I'm not quite as I don't know if the word is confident or cocky about Pitt's chances against these other 5 teams. Now, that being said, there are a lot of wins on this schedule, and I keep coming back to this idea that after the Western Michigan game last year, there were a lot of people convinced that Pitt wouldn't be able to stop anyone for the rest of the season. The defense was that bad. If they couldn't stop Western Michigan, how are they going to stop anyone else? How are they going to stop, Sam Howell and Brennan Armstrong and all these guys in the ACC? And obviously, the defense rebounded, had its ups and downs, but rebounded and played well the rest of the season, and really had a significant amount to do with winning the ACC championship game. We're coming out of this Georgia Tech game saying, I don't know how Pitt's going to score on anybody. I don't know how Pitt's going to move the ball on anybody. And just to kind of, we're not going to go too far down this path, because we did it a lot yesterday. We did it a lot in the post-game show. I wrote 20 thoughts on a Monday morning, yesterday morning on Panther-Lair.com. You can go read that, and there's a lot in there on these same very topics. I'm not convinced that Pitt's offense is as bad as they were against Georgia Tech. I am convinced that it was an offense that was disjointed and out of sync and not really showing much cohesion for the first 3 quarters. And we could debate back and forth about what we want to take out of those final two drives when Keaton Slovis was 10 of 15 for 167 and 2 touchdowns. We can debate, what we want to take out of, 20 completions, 20 out of 29 for 244, 3 touchdowns and an interception, 20 out of 29 for 244 and 2 touchdowns in an interception in the second half, where, how many did I count? 14 out of his 20 passes were 10 yards or more in the second half. And again, a lot of that comes on those final 2 drives. You can debate what Georgia Tech was trying to do defensively and what they were willing to give up and what they were willing to allow Pitt to complete. But I'm going to say that there's at least something Pitt can draw out of that fourth quarter. And for the most part, second half, where Slovis seemed to get into a rhythm and connect with guys like Konate Mumfield better and Jared Wayne better, and obviously the 2 touchdown passes to Jaden Bradley. It wasn't perfect by any means. Still, obviously, a lot of room for improvement out of what we saw in the second half. But if you're looking for any kind of silver lining, it's probably there. If you're looking for any kind of signs of encouragement for what this offense can be over the next 7 games, it's probably in the second half, and more specifically in the fourth quarter on those 2 final drives. Regardless of what Georgia Tech was willing to give up, I don't think they wanted Pitt to march 99 yards. I don't think they were willing to give up a 99-yard possession. And I don't think they were willing to give up 2 touchdowns. I mean, the 99-yard possession makes it 19-14. I think Georgia Tech, while they may have been willing to concede something, I don't think they wanted it to turn into a 5-point game with just a few minutes left to play. Because you get a 5-point game with a few minutes left to play, and now you're in real danger of something going wrong. I don't think you lay off quite that much at that point in the game, with the potential of the game to turn into a 5-point game. I think you're still trying to defend and stop them, particularly when the possession starts at the 1-yard line. So I'm going to give Pitt credit for that drive. I'm going to give him credit for the final touchdown drive as well. To the extent where Frank Signetti and Keaton Slovis and Mumfield and Means and Wayne and Bradley should be able to take, and Bartholomew should be able to take something out of those 2 drives and out of that fourth quarter that they can build on going forward. And it comes back to that question of offensive identity, of figuring out what they want to be, what they want to do, and how they're going to do it. And I thought maybe the first half of Tennessee, second half of West Virginia, I thought those would give Frank Signetti and the rest of this staff the ideas of what Keaton Slovis can do and what they want him to do and what he wants to do and what he's able to do. I thought. And maybe that was what they were attempting early on in the Georgia Tech game, but they were just so out of sync, out of not really doing it since the first half of the Tennessee game. We talked a lot about that, about the wasted opportunity of the Rhode Island game. And I promise I'm going to stop complaining about that at some point. I don't know if it's today, but at some point I will stop complaining about the Rhode Island game. But maybe the fourth quarter, gave Slovis a chance to get in rhythm. I mean, he completed 4 passes. In the second half, he completed 4 passes of 10 yards or more to Konate Mumfield, 2 to Gavin Bartholomew, 4 to Jared Wayne. The 2 touchdown passes to Jaden Bradley were both more than 10 yards, and then he had a 15-yard pass to Carter Johnson. So I feel like that's the area that Pitt needs to attack, needs to be able to attack, and should be able to attack with these receivers and their skill sets. Bub Means had one too, if I didn't say that. So, that's what they need to build on. That's what they need to carry forward from that game, is that ability to attack that range with some of the rhythm that they had in the fourth quarter on those final 2 drives and in the second half, where, 2 fumbles held them back. I mean, the second Vincent Davis fumble was an absolute killer. The interception obviously was a bad play. The intentional grounding really that killed a drive. You had 4 drive-killing plays right there between the 2 fumbles, the interception, and the intentional grounding penalty, which I don't entirely agree with as a call. I think it was a screen. I don't think it was a screen pass. It was clearly a screen pass. It was being thrown to Sebo Flemister. Did he throw it over Flemister's head? Maybe an uncatchable ball? Probably, but you can't say there wasn't a receiver out there. Flemister was drifting out that way on a screen. Unfortunately, if he had stayed in the block, he could have picked up the guy who rushed Keaton Slovis' throw and maybe gotten him to, given him a chance to throw another play. But the play was a screen pass. I digress. They need to carry over what they did in the fourth quarter there, and some of the times when the offense did get into a rhythm and did get into a bit of a flow and some consistency and some cohesiveness, that needs to carry over. And if it does, then they should beat Virginia Tech. You know what I mean? They should beat Duke and Virginia. And Carolina is going to be a battle because Carolina can score. That's going to be one of those games like we talked about so much prior to the Tennessee game of whether this offense can go blow for blow with a more high-powered offense to win a shootout like we talked about. And then we'll see what Miami ends up being. But as you look around the Coastal, you're still not all that scared of anybody. I don't think anybody's emerged as sort of the big dog or the alpha male in this group. Right? Pitt had a chance to emerge as that. If they had gone out and taken care of business and beat Georgia Tech convincingly, then Pitt would be that team. But they're not because they didn't. So now they're right in the middle of the pack with everyone else still trying to look for separation. Separation. Pitt's receivers need it, and Pitt needs it. Put that on a billboard. Elsewhere in the ACC, it's really the Atlantic Division's interesting, man. 5 teams really battling this thing out, and you could say that maybe Wake and NC State. Okay, so there's 5 teams. 4 of them are ranked: Clemson, NC State, Wake Forest, and Syracuse are ranked, and then Florida State is kind of right in that mix as well. Clemson beat Wake Forest 2 weeks ago. They beat NC State this past weekend. They play at Boston College next. It's kind of the breather, the bye week in between, and then they have Florida State and Syracuse. If anybody in that division other than Clemson is going to win, it's going to have to be a team winning one of those games. It's going to have to be Florida State or Syracuse because Wake and NC State now have those losses to Clemson. If anybody else is going to come out of the Atlantic, it's going to have to be Florida State or Syracuse because I don't see Clemson stumbling against Boston College. I think they also play Miami later down the stretch, and then they have they already played Georgia Tech. They have somebody else. But it's going to have to be Florida State or Syracuse, and those teams are going to have to not stumble in their other games. And we've talked about Syracuse's next 6 games quite a bit. We know they are facing a real gauntlet after getting to 5-0 with a win over Wagner this past weekend. So we'll watch the Atlantic. That'll continue to be interesting. The Atlantic and Coastal are both interesting for different reasons. The Coastal because we don't know if anyone's good. The Atlantic because it seems like they might have 4 or 5 teams that are good. And I think both divisions are going to be battles. And, the key games are going to be these games against Clemson. Somebody's going to have to find a way to knock off Clemson at least once to have a chance for someone else to get back to Charlotte for the second year in a row. All right, and then, of course, yesterday was Monday. They released the official game notes for the week, and with that came the depth chart, which we always talk about here on Tuesday on the Morning Pitt. And not a lot to, really, nothing to observe. Coaches didn't change the depth chart at all for this week. No changes. That means Owen Drexel is still the listed starter at center. So good job, Owen. Hopefully you can get back sometime soon. I don't know if there are any other injury guys that are sort of obviously not playing or obviously haven't been playing. Owen has not played in the last couple of games, and it seems like he's going to be out for a little while. Rodney Hammond's still listed as an or backup with Vincent Davis and Sebo Flemister behind Izzy Abanikanda. Hammond hasn't played since the West Virginia game. Seems like he'll be out for a little bit longer. Abanikanda left the Georgia Tech game. Who knows how long he might be out, or potentially could be back this week. Don't really know what that situation is going to look like. But otherwise, it like I said, it's not changed. And I don't think there's anything too big that jumps out here on the depth chart that would need to be changed. I'll tell you something that stood out to me. And I asked Pat Narduzzi about this yesterday. Was Tyler Wiltz. Tyler Wiltz played 30-plus snaps. Let me get the exact number. I have it on Pro Football Focus. On defense, he played 30 snaps against Georgia Tech. And that was notable to me. That was the most snaps he's played on defense all season. And he was playing, he's playing that star linebacker position where Bengali Kamara is the starter. Kamara played 45 snaps on defense against Georgia Tech. Wiltz played 30. Kamara works in that Delta defensive sub package, which they use on third down. But whereas Wiltz is just playing base defense snaps. So you're looking at, even though Kamara outsnapped Wiltz 45-30, you're looking at a separation that's probably quite a bit closer than that. Could be a difference of maybe 5 to 8 snaps between the two. Almost a pure split or a platoon at that star linebacker position in the base defense. Basically first and second downs and third and short. And that's really interesting because as much as we hyped up Bengali Kamara in the offseason, and I just like I've copped to doing it with some of the other guys, I will definitely cop to doing it with Bengali Kamara. I talked him up a lot. And again, based on my own observations, based on what I've been hearing and what people around the program were saying. But I hyped him up a ton. And while I think he has made some splash plays, I think he's made some big plays, I think he's flashed that potential. I think he's also shown some of the signs of inexperience and, just kind of getting comfortable on the field and understanding the speed of the game and how important the details are to be aligned, be lined up at the exact right spot to execute your assignments as well, as perfectly as possible. And he's learning that. Well, the coaches decided apparently in that game to give Tyler Wiltz extra opportunities. And like I say, they had a pretty close to a platoon split in snaps in the base defense between Wiltz and Kamara. And I thought that was very interesting. I asked Pat Narduzzi about it, and he said that Wiltz has been playing really well, that he's given them some things out there, and it's getting him into the rotation. And I thought that was really interesting to see. When you look at the defensive snaps in that game, Savasi Dennis played every snap. He played 75 snaps, largely, I think, because Brandon George wasn't available, and so there was no one else really to go in at middle linebacker. I know Nick Lappy, the walk-on, had played a little bit middle linebacker earlier this season and was getting some opportunities there, but it's about Dennis and George at that middle linebacker position, and without Brandon George available, Servassier Dennis had to play all the snaps. Shane Simon played 53 snaps, kind of splitting reps there with Solomon DeShields, who played the other 22, although that's sort of a similar situation with Kamara and Wiltz, where DeShields plays in the Delta defensive package, and Simon only plays in the base. So Simon played 53 snaps in the base defense, which would be most of the defensive snaps in that game. DeShields did come in the base defense for a little bit here and there, but he seems to be making more of an impact in that Delta defensive package, getting a couple sacks so far this season and generally showing sort of his explosiveness and athleticism. The rotation at outside linebacker is going to be one of the things we've watched all season. It's going to be interesting to watch going forward. If the coaches decide to keep rotating and almost completely splitting the snaps between Kamara and Wiltz, we'll see how that impacts and how that plays out if they end up going drive to drive with it. And then also if DeShields can kind of work into more of a rotation with Shane Simon. I don't think that group of four has played at the level they need to thus far. I think Servassier Dennis has been really good. I think he is really good. But those four outside linebackers collectively as a group and certainly individually need to be better overall against the run and the pass. Because the run it's getting a little bit concerning. Right now, Pitt is ranked number 51 nationally in run defense. They're giving up 125 rushing yards per game. We'll get into the context of that in a second. But just for comparison, last year, Pitt was number 6 nationally in rush defense. The year before, 2020, they were number 3. And the year before that, 2019, they were number 12. All right, so that's kind of, I think, where they want to be. 2018, they were 80th in rush defense. I think there were a lot of things that went into that. I think at that point, they were still playing, Paul Johnson was still at Georgia Tech, which is always going to skew those rushing yards because of how much they ran the ball. But you look at the last 3 years, ranking 6, 3, and 12. It's a far cry from where they're at right now, ranking number 51. Now, West Virginia ran for 190 yards. Georgia Tech ran for 232. All right, the other 3 games, they held their opponents under 100 rushing yards, which if you can hold an opponent under 100 rushing yards in college football, that's pretty good. That's a very good day. They had some key inopportune times where they gave up a few rushing plays in those 3 games, Tennessee and Western Michigan and Rhode Island. But for the most part, they played well defending the run in those games. It was the West Virginia game and the Georgia Tech game where they really gave up something. And in particular, they gave up some long runs, some back-breaking runs. This Georgia Tech game, Pitt scores a touchdown to make it 19-14. And Georgia Tech comes out on the first play of the next drive and busts a 63-yard run. Just a back-breaking, game-deciding run, even though, each team would score another touchdown. But, that was a situation where Pitt had just scored, like I said, to thought I had the playbook here with the timing. It doesn't matter. Pitt had just scored to make it 19-14. If they get a 3 and out, the offense has got a little bit of rhythm and momentum to it. They're able to come back and maybe score. And take over the game and maybe sneak out of their home stadium with a win that they, for the most part of the game, hadn't really, a game that they hadn't really controlled to that point. But a 63-yard run right off the bat. No chance after that. That was effectively the ball game, and Georgia Tech scored a touchdown, and that did it. And even though Pitt was able to drive down the field and score another touchdown to make it a 5-point loss, it was still a loss. That was a crucial play in this game. And we'll talk about the defense more over the course of this week because we've had so much focus on the offense that I almost feel like the defense is getting a little bit of a free pass, which for the most part they deserve. I think for the most part in that Georgia Tech game, they played 3 quarters of really, really good football. You know what I mean? Like Georgia Tech had 9 points through 3 quarters. Yeah, they kicked their 4th field goal early in the 4th quarter, and it was 12-7. Pitt took the ball, and that was Vincent Davis's 2nd fumble. The first play after the field goal, Georgia Tech gets the ball back and goes down the field and scores a touchdown to make it 19-7. But they gave up 9 points through 3 quarters. That's good defense. I mean, like, no matter how you want to slice it or cut it or whatever you want to say about this or that, I mean, that's good defense. But to give up a 63-yard run when you absolutely had to get a stop to give your team a chance to win, even if you played great for 45 minutes, you needed one more stop. And they couldn't get it. And not only did they not get a stop, they gave up a huge play. So a little bit concerning there. You want to see this team locked down against the run. It's what they're supposed to be good at. And they've been pretty good at it for the most part, but they've got some holes out there, and they've allowed some big plays that I think is pretty concerning. Otherwise, I mean, as we look at the two deep, there's not. I think, you know, we do focus a lot on the offensive side of the ball. I don't think there's much in the way of the two deep that, you know, I would say, boy, they got to start trying this or got to start trying that in terms of personnel. I mean, I think when you look at the snap counts, it's what you would expect it to be and what you would want it to be. Servassier Dennis playing all the snaps. You know, Brandon Hill and Eric Howlett right behind him, only missing a couple of plays each. Those guys have to be on the field as much as possible. And you know what? The number 4 guy in snaps, according to Pro Football Focus from the Georgia Tech game, Kalijah Kancey. He played 61 snaps out of like 75 defensive plays. So that's who you want. That's where you want them to be. That's who you want on the field. That 7, 8, 9 combination of Dennis and Kancey and Hill plus Eric Howlett. You want those 4 guys on the field as much as possible. And then, you know, MJ Devonshire leading the corners in snaps, you know, and Marquez Williams and AJ Woods kind of right behind him. You get into the rotation of the outside linebackers. You get Habba Baldonado leading the defensive ends in snaps, which is what you want. And then John Morgan and Deslin Alexander kind of splitting behind him. I think they've done okay with their defensive rotations. I don't think there have been too many problems. I think they just need to get, you know, the execution has to improve. The details have to improve, and this defense has to really lock down. And they have to play like every snap, like, you know, the game depends on it. Because when you have a run like that 63-yard run, the game really does depend on every snap. I mean, it's not too much of an exaggeration to say play every snap like the game depends on it. Because with the way the offense is playing right now, the game does depend on every defensive snap. You can't give up a big play like that, or else you're going to put your team in a difficult position. And that's a lot of pressure on the defense. That's an unfair or an imbalance of pressure on the defense. But that's just how it is right now. That's just how it is right now. You don't have a choice. You know, if the offense raises its game, maybe you have a little more wiggle room on defense. But I think if you're the defensive team, you have to. If you're the defensive players, you've got to approach every game as if you guys have to be the ones to win it. Which they put in a winning effort for 3 quarters. I don't think there's any question about it. You know, and even to, even just giving up another field goal early in the fourth quarter. If all you do is give up field goals, you give up 4 field goals through, 3+ quarters, you've played really well on defense. They just need to, keep playing like that and not give up those big plays, not give up that 63-yard run or some of the runs that West Virginia had that put them in jeopardy. All right, I think that's the things we wanted to cover for today. This is, we can talk about the defense, and we will talk about the defense a little bit later this week, talk about some of the guys who are playing well, and also some of the special teams problems that are creeping up, particularly with penalties. But for the most part, his defense has been fine. You know what I mean? They've been fine. They could get more sacks. They need to capitalize on some of the turnover opportunities that they weren't able to do on Saturday. But it's just about the offense. It's really still about the offense, and that's what it'll continue to be about, and that's what we'll continue to talk about this week. Of course, we'll be here every morning, Monday through Friday with the Morning Pitt. Comes out around 7 a.m., so you know when to look for it. We'll have it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's on all the podcast places, Spotify and Apple and all those places. And then, of course, we'll have it on the front page at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's just a way to get your morning started with some Pitt conversation. 20 minutes, half hour, however long it takes to talk about whatever we want to talk about on any given day. That's what we do right here with the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So, of course, we'll have the Wednesday night live Panther-Lair show tomorrow night. We'll have a post-game show after the Virginia Tech game on Saturday. Lots of things we do right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button on this video. We appreciate that very much. and tune back in. Come back again on Wednesday for the next Morning Pit. So thanks again for checking it out. Hope you're having a great week so far. Hope you have a great Tuesday, and we will talk to you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.